The issue of chemicals in the environment is a story about science, politics, and humanity's relationship with the planet. My name is Chris Hughes, independent scientist, and this is the Chemical Journeys podcast. Join me as we uncover the story of chemicals in the environment through conversations with individuals working in this space. So, let's get started. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Chemical Journeys podcast. Today I'm speaking with Stephen Brennan, who is the co-founder and CEO of Foresight, a software platform that helps organizations make sense of complex and fast-moving chemical regulations, ensuring that they're always prepared for what's coming next. Stephen, thanks for joining me.
Very much, Chris. Really nice to be here.
No, it's great to have you on, and I'm really excited about this one because we hear so much these days about software as a service and new tech startups. The economy is really kind of shifting, but it's not the sort of thing that you typically think of in the regulatory compliance world. So it's great to have you on this podcast to really open up this world to us and help people learn a bit more about how it all works. But before we get into that, why don't you tell us a bit more about yourself and your career journey to date?
Absolutely, Chris. I suppose first thing to say is I must say you're bringing a lot of industry expertise forward with your podcasts at the moment. I was listening through a bit of your back catalogue just in the course of the week to prepare for this, and I think that you've got some really good speakers. So I'm very encouraged to be able to share my experience. Like a lot of the
Thank
folks
you.
that I listen to over the week, background in chemistry, I think that comes with the domain, not for everyone. And I had interest in chemistry from a very young age. One of my earliest memories was mixing up various shampoo bottles in the shower, trying to create some new formulation. And my mum wasn't too happy with that. What she ended up doing was making my sisters wash their hair with my concoctions so that we wouldn't waste the shampoo. But that's led me to do chemistry at university and ended up doing a PhD in chemistry as well. My preference was for physical chemistry, and my thesis or the area of research that I conducted was the creation and application of super hydrophobic surfaces. So these essentially are super water repellent surfaces, and at the time were touted for lots of different kinds of applications, moving droplets around on ships for microfluidics and so on, or super water repellent technical clothing, that kind of thing. But probably what's standing out to some of your listeners is PFAS.
Yeah.
So I was a very early user of PFAS, and if I had known then what I know today, I would have been a lot more careful with the risk assessments. So with that, then that's opened up a role that I got within industry after I'd done the PhD. I moved over to England and I got to work for Rolls-Royce, an aerospace and defense company. And I suppose I landed into this area on regulations and substances of concern and so on just by pure chance. At Rolls-Royce, I was working on their REACH program as a materials engineer, which meant that I was getting very hands-on with helping to substitute hazardous chemistries from manufacturing processes. So that was a really interesting experience because, first of all, it was a new thing for lots of companies, and we were really just trying to set up what that substitution program would look like and dealing with all of those teething pains. Little did we know at that time that when we were setting that all up, lots of organizations would still be going through those pains at the moment. That was my journey into the regulatory space because a lot of those substitution programs were driven by regulations such as REACH. We were using some of the outputs from those programs to inform REACH applications for authorizations or how we respond to restriction proposals and so on and so on. So I'd done that for several years and then went into another defense company for a year and realized it was pretty much just the same, a lot of downstream user requirements as I was getting more interested in regulatory space. So I decided that I would join a consultancy prior to the 2018 registration deadline to get more experience on the upstream or manufacturer and importer requirements, particularly to registration. So I was more trial by fire. I was joined in October. The 2018 deadline was around 6 months, 7, 8 months later. And I was quick into managing regulatory projects, which I maybe didn't have a lot of experience around reach registration at the time, but towards the end of that period, I felt that I got okay at it. It was serviceable, I would suggest. Done that for a few years, working on registrations, consortium management, then taking on leadership for that team within that consultancy and trying to expand that service line into reach authorization requirements and other related work. With that, I suppose I felt I had done the industry side, I had done the consultancy side, and then I thought, well, I'd just maybe try and see what other spaces I could work in here. So while I went back into industry for a year, I started thinking about how we could better solve some of the problems that I had encountered over the course of my career. A good friend of mine, Johnny Campbell, was moving back from England as well. He was living in England and then he moved back just after COVID. Together, we sat down and came up with the idea of using software to solve some of these problems. That was how we set up Foresight.
Thanks for painting that picture and that story, because it sounds, in some ways, it's quite a typical regulatory journey. So you've got the PhD, you had this whole world kind of opened up to you when you got that PhD, and then you ended up working in industry, and then you got caught by the regulatory machinery and sort of addressing all those needs and all those challenges in the regulatory world. But you've explored all around that. It sounds like you've been through the different levels of organization. And yeah, I guess what you highlighted there is that with a company like Rolls-Royce, with a lot of the regulatory challenges, these are kind of downstream user challenges. So you've got to deal with stuff that's coming down the tracks that you don't really have that much control of.
Absolutely. I suppose there's just a couple of different things that stood out to me from that time is one is the volume of change that was coming down the pipelines, or as people say, but also the impact that some of these changes would have on an organization, not necessarily specific to Rolls-Royce.
Yeah.
During my tenure there, I was also working in part of some trade associations such as the International Aerospace Environmental Group. I could see there that there's lots of organizations that were dealing with the same problems, the volume of change and the impact that this change would have on operations footprint, manufacturing processes, materials that they're used to provide certain performance envelopes to their products and so on. I think one of the challenges that industry was dealing with and probably still dealing with to a degree is chromates. They're a wonderful chemistry in lots of different ways, but I think what the challenge there is that it's been embedded into many different manufacturing processes, which makes it really hard to untangle. There's no like for like substitution for these chromates. They're used on metal alloys as much as they are on different kind of metal substrates to provide primarily corrosion protection, but other functional requirements as well. And it's just all that complexity has created a scenario which is just really hard to substitute. With that said, although they're still dealing with some of that challenge at the moment, there has been some notable substitutions for that industry. For example, trichloroethylene as a degreasing agent was on authorization sunset date, I think April 2016, if I remember correctly. Lots of different companies across the markets has been able to move away from that particular chemistry for degreasing. So change can happen, but as I heard from one of the leadership team in Rolls-Royce, at the start of my career, is any change creates a risk. And it's really all about what work needs to happen in order to mitigate that risk. And that's where the cost comes in. So that means, substitution in itself is not just a technical challenge, but it's an economic challenge as well. Changing hazardous chemistries is probably not top of shareholders' minds, but it's definitely something that needs to continue.
Yes, yeah, and it's kind of like a blind process in a way, because we have all this technology that we've used and these applications that we use chemicals in, and perhaps the health or environmental impacts of those chemicals in those uses might not have been fully understood at the time that technology was evolving. And now there are these new issues or new questions emerging, and things are being unpicked here, there, and everywhere, and it's a it's a blind process that creates a lot of complexity.
Yeah, just on that, Krista, do you mean the kind of the policy making process is just a little bit blind, or maybe the process by which companies would use these chemistries?
No, I mean more discovering that a certain chemical has a certain property that
Yeah,
triggers a regulatory impact that then turns on a process that ripples
yeah,
through economies.
absolutely. I suppose it's something I always lean into when talking to people about the REACH regulation who's never had to work with REACH before. I suppose what it has done is created a data set on substances that we never had before.
Mm.
Certainly not to the depth and volume that is being created through registration process, for example. And I suppose what that has unlocked is a volume of information. I say it's a backlog of information which regulators are working through to identify risks to human health and the environment. And that whole process in itself, I don't know when or if we would ever get to the end of it to be able to know to understand the full set of risks. But I suppose one of the challenges here then is the volume of information that is being worked. And that's one of the reasons why we set up Foresight was to try and generate key insights from that information so that organizations can have a I don't want to use the pun, but have the foresight to know what's coming down the pipeline for them. It's a bit of a horizon scanning element to it so that they can try and preempt, what these regulatory proposals and what impact that would have on their operations and footprint.
Yes, and I recall this from when I was working in more general regulatory consultancy areas as well, that we talked about this was almost like the holy grail of something that regulatory professionals could use or would benefit from, because other than that, they've all got their own networks and resources that they're looking at, but there's always that little thing keeping you awake at night, that there's a regulation or a change somewhere that you've missed and it's going to have a major impact on your business. So why don't you tell us a bit about Foresight? How did it come about, and what's it there to do?
I suppose the first thing is that the foresight's kind of born out of my experience within industry and consultancy. I think I'm not technical at all, but in order to try and solve this problem with whenever I was working in industry, I was building SQL databases using Microsoft Access. Excel spreadsheets probably are the go-to standard here, and emails, Excel spreadsheets and emails, a lot of times for a lot of
Mm.
organizations. And I had to build the SQL database so I could relate data better, to better relate substance information to bill of materials. I was trying to solve a particular problem there. But
Mm.
I'm not software inclined. I'm not a developer. My version of that database was useful for a time, but it had some limitations as well. And that was back in 2014 or so. And
Mm.
that's really as far as I got with it. Any subsequent organizations I joined, I probably done something similar, whether it was an Excel file or whatever. I was doing that for clients whenever I was working in a consultancy as well, if we were doing impact assessments and that kind of thing. But that's just really as far as I got with it. I suppose what's happened, we started the kicking around the idea of foresight in 2023, and what happened there was OpenAI dropped its GPT-3 or 3.5 model,
Mhm.
and we started playing around with it. And, like everyone else, we were using it as a search engine, trying to find out what it could tell us about the regulatory space. And in there, I would put in some ideas around, well, tell me the reach registration requirements for a company that imports 1 ton or 1.5 tons of sulfuric acid into the market. The answer it would give me would be a good, very positive reply, but it wasn't accurate at all based on my experience. But with that said, I suppose we used it a little bit further and we were playing around with some of the other tools that came with GPT, not just GPT itself. And we found that it was a really good way of interrogating large data sets to pull out some semi-structured information. You could throw it a piece of legislation or a proposed piece of legislation. You could throw it meeting minutes from an agency meeting and you could extract certain information from that, primarily around its machine learning toolkit, but also using other toolkits there as well. What we tested early on is like, well, how much of this information can it take? how quickly can it generate this structured information? How can we get this semi-structured information and deliver that to users so that they can make sense of it to help identify if there's something coming down the pipeline which would impact on their products or operations. So that was kind of the early days where we got to with Foresight. I suppose one of the other things to talk about here as well is AI. Generally, we're trying to stay away from saying that we're an AI powered intelligence platform, because I think that, first of all, we don't control the definition of AI, and everyone has their own definition of AI, and therefore we cannot control what we mean by when we say something like that.
Mhm.
But I suppose what we're doing is using software primarily to try and help companies stay ahead of the ever changing policies and legislation in different markets around the world. And I suppose when we talk about AI, one of the tools that we would be using is OCR, which is like optical character recognition. So I remember in the early days as well having to go through nearly 2,000 safety data sheets, pulling out substance information, getting the substance name, product name, CAS numbers, EC numbers, so that I can create that database to find out if there's a policy change and it impacts on my bill of materials. But with OCR, that's a first step to do that automatically. So optical character recognition, it can take something like a safety data sheet, and even if it's in character ready form, or if it's in like a photograph, or like all the different multitudes of different formats, as in software formats that a safety data sheet can exist, it can review all of that, extract the characters, i.e. the text from that, and combining that with something like machine learning can help you extract more structured information from a safety data sheet that probably wasn't possible before. So the tens, maybe hundreds of hours I spent copying and pasting is now literally a couple of hours to do a few thousand safety data sheets using software. So that's just one application we would use it for at the moment.
That's amazing. I was thinking about that a while ago, doing some consultancy work and thinking about, oh, wouldn't it be so useful if you had all this information that's buried in safety data sheets and folders and photocopies of information? Really need that to enable this kind of regulatory mapping and sort of risk screening. Is that something that you invite your customers to do when they sign up with Foresight? They can load this kind of information into the tool?
Yes, so at the moment, the product is still in its early days. We have a tool on the back end of Foresight. It's not user facing at the moment, so the users can't do this, but we have a tool on the back end that we can go and get their safety data sheets. They can send it to us. It can live on their website or whatever, but we can take those safety data sheets, put it through our Foresight tool, and extract all of that substance information and other related information. And then that can live on our platform as a database. So then what we also offer is we track different changes for chemical policy around different markets around the world, so that whenever there is a legislative proposal, and that legislative proposal is probably unstructured as well, but it also contains substance information, we can also put that information through the Foresight tool. And then ultimately what we can do with our database is link the user safety data sheet or other data about their products or operations and link that to the market changes. So we've got this legislative proposal is calling out this substance, and then we can make that link. And then the user's just notified to say, hey, this new legislation in Peru is going to impact on these products, as an example.
No, that sounds really valuable. Another thing I was thinking is that, often you have multiple identifiers for a chemical, right? You can have like a CAS number, a name, an EC number, and even multiple, if the chemical has, say, a complex composition, then there can be different CAS numbers associated with it or different chemical identifiers. So, is that something that Foresight can help with?
It's a really good question and a really difficult challenge.
Yeah.
What we're building and what we have proof of concept for as well is an algorithm where it takes the information or the substance information which is available to it, and it could just be those things. It could be a substance name, and this could just be on the SDS, or it could be in the legislative proposal, or it can be any other data set. So it takes the substance name, or it could be an EC number, it could be a CAS number, it could be a trade name, And what this algorithm does, it takes that one piece or several pieces of information, and then it tries to match it against our internal database. And with that, then gives an output to say that this piece of information or this document says this substance. We think it's this substance with this IUPAC name, with this EC number, with this CAS number. And we're confident, our confidence rating's like 99% because there's an exact match somewhere. Or it could be because some key missing information, we would give it a different rating. We would say it's like 80% accurate or whatever. And then anything that's really lower down, then we would invite user review of that to say, well, we think there's a 50% match here. This is what it says in this document. This is what it says in our database. We invite you to review that to confirm that that substance is actually what we think or what this algorithm has said it is. So we
Nice.
try and solve for the problem that way. So we're automating as much as possible
Yeah.
so that the expert has only spent more time on their review or their reasoning rather than just them wasting time managing information.
Yes. Yeah, yeah. I appreciate that it's probably a journey as well in terms of training and improving the tool. And I guess it's good that you're inviting your users to participate in that as well, because then they have the opportunity to put information in, and they probably also appreciate that there's a hunch there might be a problem there, because that's the other thing, right? Sometimes they just need an early warning that they need to go and check. There's nothing to worry about here.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we do with all of the content that we create on the platform is it's expert reviewed. So everything that we publish on the platform at the moment, there's just a lot of market updates. Japan's proposing an MRL for this substance, or there's this new legislative proposal by the EPA. All of that information that we publish to our users as alerts at the moment. And if they're tracking by substance, we'll tell them exactly what substance is being called out. But everything that we publish is kind of expert reviewed as well. We
Nice.
know that AI is good at automating a lot of it, but we know that AI is not good at doing all of it, especially when it comes to reasoning. It's something that we don't do with AI is try to reason things
Mm.
in any complex way. Any new AI model that gets shipped, I think Gemini is shipping version 3 soon, or Google shipping Gemini 3. And I'll test that with the prompt is like, what's the reach requirements for, or registration requirements for a company that's importing this volume of substance into the EU market per year? And again, it's very specific to its general knowledge base. And it probably won't give me a satisfactory answer, but I at least test it just to see if we're getting closer to getting to the Holy Grail. But
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think
yeah.
we're always going to have human reasoning.
Yeah, no, I suppose that's reassuring in a way. I think I had a similar experience to you as I've been dipping more and more into using AI tools, and especially as I've been trying to curate the content that this podcast is creating, because I'm conscious that there's a wealth of information in this podcast through the back catalogue. Some feedback that I've had from people is that they just don't have time to sit down and listen to 60 minutes of a podcast. I've been trying to work with the transcripts and see if AI can give me anything that I would want to read. And I have to say that I'm struggling at the moment. Maybe that's just the perfectionism, but the term AI slop really does ring true for me when it comes to that sort of thing. And I think people can see it when they're reading or engaging with content. They can see still something that there's a human touch to.
Yeah, I think it's important. I think for your specific use case, translation of audio into text, yeah, it's a challenging thing to solve, especially whenever it comes to dealing with different accents and,
Yeah.
a lot of non-native English speakers, although they a lot of times speak better English than I do. There's just so much complexity involved in there. It's going to be really hard to get a tool which is going to give you a verbatim translation. But something that we've been using it for, as an example, is EU Parliament debates, particularly around PFAS, retrovision, that kind of thing.
Mm.
That's all published by the European Union. You can get access to it. You can push that through an AI tool, get a transcript, and it's a good average of what the conversation was about. Plus, there's translation on their side as well because they have their own translators. A lot of the MPs that are debating in their own language. So then there's a translation required there as well. So what you're really getting is an average of what was said, not probably, and a lot of times not exactly what was said, which causes more challenge. But it gives you a good kind of overview of what was discussed.
Yeah, I can imagine that must be the value of that must be immense because this is information that could be really impactful. The further out you can cast the net, the more information that you can process, the better chance you have of picking up a signal that could be strategically really, really important for a business.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Was one article, so every week, a lot of people might notice or know Foresight via our weekly newsletter. So what we do is publish some news and insights that we've gathered over the course of the week. And we used to be a lot more consistent on this. We used to post a lot of stuff, but now we're focused on building product. It's a bit challenging to get the time. But we post about 5 articles per week. And some of those articles are probably just some of the things that we've found with Foresight over the course of that week. And just last week, there was an article that we posted, which is around, it was based on a Netherlands Parliament discussion, of which there was a document published on one of their websites. And it was around REACH Article 129. Now, this is a mechanism I've never heard about before, but it's a mechanism which exists in the REACH regulation. I've actually read the REACH regulation a few times, but I've never dealt with this particular article in earnest.
Yeah.
But it's where a member state can notify the European Commission that they want to implement a ban under some of the REACH framework for whatever reason. A particular issue around in Netherlands at the moment is steel slags, or the is an argument of whether it's a waste or it's a byproduct, but it's the fact that it was being produced and it was being used for certain applications, such as construction. And it was identified that this was potentially creating a hazard that needed to be managed, and they didn't know how to manage it, so they implemented some kind of a restriction, as far as I'm aware. I'm not too into the detail of it. We caught this discussion, or Foresight caught this discussion at the Netherlands Parliament, and then surfaced it to us, and we reviewed it and then pushed it out to the platform for our users. Digging more into Article 129, it's been used a few times before, and it's used by France for bisphenol A in thermal printer paper, which led to a REACH restriction. And
Mm.
I think it was used by Denmark as well in the past, which led around CMRs and a potential restriction around, or an Annex 17 restriction around CMRs. So that's where we get an EU member state parliament debate, catching information there, and then it goes for discussion with the REACH committee. We'll discuss that this month at the EU level, and then that can lead to further action down the line. This is different from what you would have seen maybe if you're monitoring a website for updates. You might not have caught that. But it's
Mm.
still early days, and we don't know exactly where it will go. But I just thought, being a REACH geek, it was an
Yeah.
interesting thing that I hadn't really seen before in action.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And yeah, I guess it's an important reminder for people that the REACH regulation is massive and it has many mechanisms and many lines feeding into it, particularly from member states who often have their own internal scientists and policy people, and they need to addressing the needs of their populace. They'll come up with their own initiatives, and yeah, this Article 129 sounds really interesting as how it feeds into the top table at Reach. So yeah, we'll have to see how that one develops. I did want to say to you actually, because I was looking at your website again in advance of this, and I was really pleasantly surprised with your news feed, and it reminded me of the news pages that we used to get from Chemical Watch before they went behind a paywall. And I used
Yeah.
to quite enjoy looking at those and just seeing what's going on in the regulatory world as another regulatory geek. And I've been missing that, so I recommend people check that out.
Thanks very much,
But
Chris.
maybe we can just talking about Foresight a bit more. So about your customer and who are the kinds of customers that you're working with, and what are they saying about the tool?
It's a good question. I suppose it's quite varied, Chris. So there's lots of different actors in this space. You got your service providers,
Mm,
consultants, you got government agencies
mm,
who want to stay track of what's happening with regards to regulatory developments. And we've got NGOs who are interested in tracking things. But I suppose the customer that we're targeting at the moment, the customers that we have most of, is industry themselves. So this is primarily organizations at the moment that are interested in monitoring these updates, and they have maybe big footprints. They work in multiple markets. They work in markets that don't necessarily speak English as a first language. They can be across various different sectors, everything from, industrial or specialty chemicals through to consumer goods. And I suppose one of the key features about them as well is they have big product stewardship or regulatory affairs teams. They have more than a handful of employees that are working together to ensure that the organization is tracking the policy changes and identifying anything which may have an impact on them. And then they're collaborating together to try and maintain compliance or to make changes to mitigate risks, that kind of thing. Foresight in itself is a policy monitoring tool at the moment, but I suppose what we're kind of moving it towards based on our customer feedback is like an operating system for product stewardship teams and regulatory affairs teams. So this is for companies that maybe are tracking changes via news articles or agency updates across lots of different sources. We pull that all into one feed. And then we also are building out the toolkit to allow organizations to collaborate with that. So you can imagine like a news article, or maybe we call it an alert, because a news article is a bit more editorialized. An alert's a bit more kind of like, this is exactly what's happened. This is exactly what it means. They get something into their feeds and then they start to collaborate with their colleagues in the platform and say, hey, tagging in their manager or tagging in one of their teammates and saying, hey, I think we need to do an impact assessment here. And then they do the impact assessment, they capture the results, and that all sits within the Foresight platform. And then what that does is it creates like an auditable record so that, if there was anything down the line that they needed to double check on, and they have that full history in one place. But it also is good for managers of teams who maybe have KPIs around monitoring or management of these issues, and they want to just have a quick way of reporting on what the team's been focused on over the last week, month, 6 months, or whatever it needs to be.
Yeah, that sounds really valuable, I think, for some of these large teams. Just from my own experience working in big teams, I've seen all kinds of varieties of solutions and processes that companies implement internally. A lot of the time, there's a lot of manual churn going on. There's a lot of communication, friction between different people and getting action on things. And of course, that audit trail is so important in the regulatory world. So yeah, I mean, have you had good feedback about the tool?
Yeah, absolutely. So the reason we started out with the monitoring feed, and it's based on user feedback that we've landed on this organization workspace, and then we've landed on the need to have some kind of collaboration on the tool.
Yeah.
I could imagine these things just based on my own experience, but it's different. You need customer pull on these things as well.
Yeah.
So we're my co-founder Johnny in product design and user experience, and his school of thought is like you need to have several customers say the same thing about what the product needs to do before you actually build something. So that's meant that I haven't went ahead and worked with the development team to build this out and have all these fancy features that I've dreamed up myself. It's all about what the customer needs and what they prioritize. And that informs what our roadmap is. So things like, for example, we're talking about safety data sheet ingestion and extracting information there. That's been identified by our users as something that was important to them.
Yes.
We would build a prototype, we would test it, make sure that it works. And we've got a tool that works on the back end now. And then as we get customer feedback, then that's something that we would ship as a feature. So that sits in our roadmap as a feature now, but at some point that'll become available to our users in the future. So I suppose for me anyway, it's been interesting going from academia to industry to consultancy to now software development. I never thought I'd be in this space, but I'm hoping that the tools that we create will help people like myself in previous roles just to collaborate better, to stop manual working and manual handling of information. They always have that doubt in your mind that you've missed something because it was sat in a spreadsheet somewhere, or you needed someone to translate from Japanese to English so you could read it and all that kind of stuff. It just pulls that all together in one place.
Yes, I think you had the advantage that you yourself a deep expert in this area. You've lived the life of a regulated professional, and then you've also worked in consultancy, so you kind of know you have an idea of what companies are prepared to pay for and what their needs are. I could totally feel what you said there about having an idea and then wanting to go off and build it, because often we think, oh, wouldn't it be great if this was
Yeah.
such, and then you think, oh yeah, I'm going to go do a bit of work on that, and then you realize, oh, that's a massive project and I better put that down. Or you can invest a lot of effort in building something that people don't really want. And it sounds like you're very kind of clued in on the kind of software as a service best practices. We've learned a lot about that in the last 20 years. The really important thing is testing, like you say, doing small tests to see what people go for. It's good that you've got feedback from customers or getting information about what customers' needs are. Another thing is that customers don't always know exactly what they want, or they might think like, oh, I would really want this, but
Yeah.
then when you go off and build it, it might not sell. So you've got to use a bit your own intuition as well, I suppose, with that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's more of like a sanity check for a customer. One customer uses a different language than another customer, and it's reconciling that and being able to explain to your development team that actually this is the same feature. Whenever they say this, they both mean this is what it should do or this is the work to be done on.
Yeah.
So it's definitely helpful to have the seat of the user so that you can empathize for the problems that they're trying to deal with. So it's
Yeah.
very useful.
Yeah. And you've got the ideal kind of two founder setup as well. Sounds like you have a great relationship with your co-founder and you're serving different functions in developing this thing.
Absolutely. So it's Johnny. I've known Johnny since I was 12. So just to show my age, that was 28 years ago now. So we've known each other all that time.
Wow.
And, we've stayed close friends and all that time. And then we have a wider team as well. So it's a team of, we're 5 of us now.
Oh, wow.
And we've got some support from some real good service providers in the space as well.
Yeah.
There's work that we're doing here requires the old school consultancy approach to get sources of information and so on. And we're working with
Yeah.
some superstars there as well.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. It's great to hear it's growing as well. And you're getting to like 5 people. You really are on a journey with this. Maybe you could just tell us a little bit about where you're up to in that kind of commercialization and what was that process like for a startup? Because I think that's really kind of an unknown area for people.
Yeah, absolutely. This is something I had to learn as well. Coming from industry where things are slow and you do your annual business deployment plan and you've got your annual churn or annual cycle of work to be done. Startups are really just working on daily or weekly or even monthly sprints, regular catch-ups with the rest of the team, hyper communication, catch-ups several times a day, not traditional meetings where people are sitting around and waiting for people to talk, but literally having a quick catch-up. Have you done that? I've done this. Where are we at now? What are we going to do for the next hour? And we'll catch up in an hour's time. That's the pace that we're working at. It's quite intensive. The other thing to say about the startup scene as well, we are venture backed. So we bootstrapped until around June of this year, July of this year. And then we got investment, pre-seed investment it's called, from a couple of VCs. So that's enabled us to scale the team, offload some of the work that I was doing manually. That's freed up my time to have conversations with customers, and that's been going really well at the moment. We actually have a bit of a wait list because of where the product is, and we want to get to self-supported, but at the moment it's like we're supporting onboarding and so on. We're talking mid-November now and this is just the start of October, so we're talking a few weeks out before we would have capacity to onboard and pilot with new customers.
Wow. That's always a good sign if you're oversubscribed.
Yeah, absolutely. And every customer brings their own unique experience, and have that learning is only really good for us and for our other customers as well. One of the things that I've learned in this space, and maybe what I didn't see as much of in consultancy, is that we're getting probably more insights into how an organization works as opposed to what I was doing in the consultancy space. In a consultancy, the client had a fair idea of what the project wanted to be, and the client would issue an RFP along those lines, and you'd have conversations and kick it around and see, what the consultant would come up with, and then you have a proposal, and then you contract on that basis. Well, we're offering a solution, and it's one thing, and it's a subscription. Users can sign up to pay a monthly price, and then they have access to the toolkit. Through those conversations as well, we're kind of surveying our customers. We're like, well, how often or how much time would you spend doing, for example, monitoring on a weekly basis? And these organizations are spending 70, 100 hours a week across the organization just reading information to find out what's happening in the markets that they're got, products or operations. And we're getting insights that way, and then we can feed that back to their management and say, hey, did you know that your team spent all this time doing this thing? We think that we can get like an 80% improvement here, and that's a good return on investment. And then that's opening up wider conversations like, oh yeah, they're doing this, but then if you help solve that, and you also solve this other thing that we're dealing with around KPIs for the program or whatever, and then we're getting good practice from on an average from other people, and then being able to feed that back into our experience as well. So that's one of the kind of marked differences from the what I've seen in consultancy and what we're kind of doing here within software.
Yeah, well, in some ways, this sounds like proper consultancy rather than kind of like the transactional consultancy of I need 10 registrations or something like
Yeah.
that, doesn't it? So it's nice, and yeah, I think this is where consultancies really earn their money if they're good. And I hear what you're saying as well about how it's different in terms of the buyer journey because you often have to get through more stage gates. If you have a more ambiguous or uncertain service, then you really have to kind of educate your customer and help them to realize the vision. They need to probably convince people within their own organization as well that this is something that's really needed. So, yeah, it's an art in itself, isn't it, really, kind of getting people to see what you can do for them.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely, I've learned a lot just over the course of the last 2 years or so that we had the concept of Foresight, and then we had early proof of concept to where we are today, where we have a functioning platform that people are paying for. It's been a lot of learning, but I can't even imagine the amount of learning we've yet to undertake as well. The thing about a startup is that you're always learning and you never stand still. It's never just good enough. Maybe when I was working in a consultancy, you met your annual revenue target and your annual sales target. That was good enough, But with this, there's no end in sight. It's just like how big
Yeah.
can that's kind of the journey that you start on whenever you take venture capitalist funding. So there's certain expectations about where we will be with regards to growth and what problems we'll be solving, not just 1 year from now, but looking further out. Companies that promote themselves as an AI company have certain expectations around them as well about growth and valuation over time. And I suppose we do fit into that category. The key thing now is that this whole AI toolkit has unlocked things for companies like us that probably wasn't available before.
Yes.
Simple problem I was talking about earlier is taking unstructured market information, being able to structure that in a way and map it to user products or operations. I don't think that would have been possible. It wouldn't have been commercially viable before at the scale that we're talking about here.
Yes. Yeah, and I guess that having that as part of the DNA of your organization at least provides that substrate because it's so dynamic, isn't it? Technology with AI that who knows what's going to come along, but at least that you're building it with that as the base, you'll be ready to integrate and evolve what it is that you're doing as the technology develops as well.
Absolutely. I know that in some of the podcasts that are people you've had on your speaking on your podcast previously have used AI and when it comes to like risk assessments and all that kind of thing as well. And I think it is still in the early stages about what that actually means in those different applications of it. So it's really exciting to see or to think about what that could look like, 1 or 5 years from now and how we're more into like the reasoning side of things rather, well, certainly from what we're trying to do at Foresight. Teams can, spend more time reasoning than just moving paper around and
Yeah.
Excel files and all that kind of stuff, and people can feel more productive as a result.
Yeah, yeah, no, there's definitely a lot of gains to be made there. I wanted to ask you as well about because just to kind of show you that you're continuing with your technical work as well. I'm aware that you're a co-opted member of the socio-economic analysis committee at ECHA as well, right? So maybe you could tell us a little bit about what you're doing there and what that's like.
Absolutely. Eka in Helsinki has been the center of my universe for quite some time since I started on my regulatory career. We were driving a lot of the work that we were doing whenever I was in industry. So it's been a good honor to be able to join the CA committee as a co-opted member. That benefits me. I get a trip to Helsinki every 3 months, catch up with the team there, broaden the network, get different perspectives from different folks across member states and other organizations. So for me, that's real. Well, I wouldn't say the dream come true, might be a little bit too far, but it definitely
Validation.
keep. Yeah, absolutely. But I suppose it kind of leans into, the work or the experience I have around substitution of hazardous chemistries in manufacturing processes is kind of you flexing that muscle that I've created in my time within the industry and as a consultant, and being able to do that is still an honor. It kind of balances the software development side nicely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I still have a preference for the regulatory work.
Yeah, you've got that itch you need to scratch every so often as you get into the weeds with some of the technical work. Yeah, are there any things that are going on there that you particularly want to highlight about, regulatory developments?
Um, Not necessarily. I think ACA is doing a good job of communicating the work that they are doing. I think probably because monitor lots of different agencies and the work that they're producing. I think ACA is the most communicative. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's really good to see. I think that the way policy is made is by good communication.
Mm-hmm.
Anything that's going on there is publicly available anyway in terms of like what restrictions is going on and authorizations and so on. I think they do a good job.
Yeah, there's a lot of information on the Echo website. It's a wealth of guidance and plenty to keep everybody busy. But I would also say that recognizing that they're putting a lot of effort into that communication thing. And I suppose that's part of accountability, right? And the importance of the work that they're doing over there. It's worth mentioning Echo has its own podcast, Safer Chemicals. They have the two chairs of the Risk Assessment and the Socio-Economic Analysis Committee who talk through the work that's ongoing there. So if anybody's interested here to learn a bit more about the activities that are happening there, recommend you check out that podcast. And I'll also mention that Eka recently launched a science part of its website, which I've really appreciated because they had some seminars on there that they've had over the last 12 or 18 months with leading experts in different areas. And to be honest, there's some really high quality information in there about some of the science that's going on as well that I recommend people check out. Right, Stephen. Well, this has been absolutely fantastic. I did want to ask you as well. So we talked a little bit about the life of working in a startup. I did want to ask you, how are you kind of looking after yourself? What's your kind of daily routine, and how are you making sure you stay productive, etc.?
That's a good question. Well, I get up very early every morning. That's because I have a 14-month-year-old baby who likes to get up at
Oh,
6 a.m. No bother.
oh,
Every
just
day.
to add to the plate.
Absolutely.
Oh.
Then it's about getting my 4-year-old. She just started school, getting her ready for school. It's another daily battle, but it's good at the same time. Well, I suppose for myself, it's about spending time with the family and looking after the family and supporting them as much as possible. Other things I like to do is, although not so much probably in the last few weeks, get out for a run a few times a week. And then my other hobby is fly fishing. I find fly fishing is a meditative kind of thing for me. So it just clears the head, gives single focus on one thing for a few hours whenever I get the chance to get out. So that in combination with the work, I think gives me three legs to the stool to keep things balanced.
Yeah, no, it sounds like you've got a good mix there. You're definitely pushing pretty hard, especially with a toddler and a 4-year-old. I'll say there is light at the end of the tunnel, and that side should get easier. But it's fair play to recognize the importance of being around for your family as well, because if you're not careful, you can miss these years. And taking the time to go fly
Exactly.
fishing also sounds wonderful.
What about yourself, Chris? How do you keep the balance, given that you're kind of startup kind of consultancy too?
Oh, that's a really good question for me. Yeah, I mean, I think it's still a work in progress. I'm doing a lot of running, and I find that I need that to kind of help to settle me down. If I'm doing a fair bit of work in the morning, often I might find out for a run is the perfect thing to go and kind of clear your head. Luckily for me, this is a passion of mine, especially this podcast. It was an experiment that I started at the beginning of the year. I felt that I was kind of called to do it. It wasn't something I thought, oh, this is going to be great for, marketing my business or whatnot. Hopefully it is good for kind of raising my profile. But more than that, the podcast is addressing something which I felt was missing in the discourse. around chemicals. So, you know, these sorts of things, it's not all work. Like I actually, it's sort of my hobby as well. So I really enjoy that. But yeah, I do a lot of reading. I try to do a bit of meditation, although that habit's slipped away. But you know, I try to stay attuned for how I'm doing, kind of mentally, and you know, picking up when I need to take a break and go for a walk or something like that. And then of course weekends generally ring fenced as well for family time, and we always prioritize going for a long walk in nature.
Yeah, absolutely. I can imagine that there's a lot of different things on your plate as well. Like, how do you deal with switching between those different things in a day? If you're doing a lot of work in the morning, maybe you're working on different projects. For me, there's a mental switch there, and then there's a debit associated with that switch. How does the running
Yeah.
clear that all, level that all out for you, or do you have another way of dealing with that?
Yeah, well, I think the running definitely does help. I did read a lot about the productivity literature in terms of the work of people like Cal Newport, and then Oliver Berkman as well has done a lot of stuff on this. And I think that the productivity world has kind of had its day because people realized that we were trying to squeeze like every last drop out of the day. And that was actually a recipe for people to feel guilty or unhappy because we can't possibly be 100% productive all the time. So it's more about giving yourself a break, I think, or giving yourself some reprieve when you've maybe not done what you set out to do at the start of the day. I think I tend to load the to-do list generally overly ambitious with every day. And then people say, you know, you should really not task switch. You should be focused on one task at a time. And I try to do that. I try to be disciplined, but sometimes I need to go with what's motivating me at that time. And I'll just try and keep pushing all the various things forward. And that seems to keep me going in terms of making sure that I'm looking after business development, business admin, and then, of course, delivering for the clients as well.
Absolutely. That those three things as well is I found I did try to do my own consultancy for a short while, and that was something I noticed as well. Whenever you're working for a larger organization, you're probably aware from your previous work,
Mm.
um, having someone do the admin for you was good, and then having other people to lean on when it comes to delivery and also on the business development side was good as well. But if you're having to do all that yourself, it does take a special mix of skills, I would say, and being aware that the task management increases the debit or reduces productivity. I think it's a good thing to be aware of, and
Yes.
it doesn't go away. I don't think there's no way to make it go away.
Yeah, yeah. So I think you feel the pain, but I think you know, when I say it sounds like you feel my pain at times, but also, you know, I don't regret for 1 second doing this because it's been super rewarding as well to go on this adventure.
And it's one of my old managers, Darren Green at Rolls Royce, said to me, he's like, if you want something done, you give it to a busy person.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Yeah.
All right, Stephen, this has been absolutely fantastic. So, and I normally ask like my two questions at the end, but I think it's pretty clear like what your big goal is. Do you have any final advice for somebody who's starting out in their career?
In terms of regulatory career,
Somebody working in
yeah,
this kind of field.
yeah. In the regulatory career, I would say just be nosy. I think one of the things that's benefited me is just being nosy about things, not just about policy and why policy is changing and finding out the roots of that, but even in your organization, be nosy as to why certain things are done in a certain way. Is it always just that way, or is there a good reason for it? And I think with that and learning all those ways that things are done or why things are done, then you can start to try and change it, to make it better. I think we're all working in this space to try and make things better, whether it be how an organization manages regulatory obligations or what policy should be around the use of chemicals. But once you learn all those rules and why things are done the way they're done, then you can start to bend them. So,
That's really good advice because, you know, quite often, well, I'm sure when we started out, the advice was keep your head down and just do as you're told and try to learn. And I think that is sound advice as well. But you do also need to have that openness, don't you, to not just trust that everything was great from the outside.
absolutely. I mean, the chemicals themselves, the fact that linking this back to the REACH registration requirements, the regulators are nosy as to what these chemicals were and what they were doing.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair to say. There's definitely a lot of investigation yet to be done. So, no, this has been absolutely fantastic, Stephen. Thanks very much for this. And yeah, appreciate you asking me some questions about my own side of things too. So, yeah, thanks very much. And thanks to everyone who's been listening. Your time's really precious. And so I'm really grateful that you spent it with us. If you've enjoyed this, please like, comment, subscribe, and spread the word about the Chemical Journeys podcast. Thanks a lot, Stephen.
Thanks very much, Chris.
Hi, folks. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Stephen and you'll join me in wishing him well with his journey with Foresight. If you'd like to find out more about Foresight, visit www.useforesight.io. That's www.useforesight.io to find out more about how this solution could help you. See you next time.